Hey there, folks. It's Tim Bradley here with the PinPoint Players, and I'm joined tonight with my friend Ramsay. Ramsay, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Today we're happen to be recording an episode on the night of the election, so it's going to be an interesting night no matter what we talk about.
Certainly will be. We'll be keeping tabs on that in the background. We're not going to mention it too much. We're going to try not to mention it too much, as we want to keep this podcast video game and dialogue oriented. So, tonight's episode, we'd like to discuss the development of the indie gaming platform.
Yes, the indie gaming platform has definitely changed a lot over the years. It's been through a huge and just very large journey. People argue that it starts all the way back in the 63 game Space War, but since there was a lack of a commercial sector with that game, nobody considers it necessarily. I think in that sense, people would consider Pong. But anyway, besides the point, it's had a very long history that's started earlier than people think, and it is extended all the way to today.
That's right. I mean, we wouldn't have the mainstream games that we have today without the independent or indie games that we had back then.
And that's the funny thing is the AAA big titles that we have today are thanked in large part to these small little project games that were in some cases they withered away and became nothing, but in some cases they became giant studios still making games today. A big example is Doom's id, just to name like probably one of the biggest examples.
Was that Doom's End?
So id Software is the company that made the game Doom.
Oh, okay.
Back in the early 90s. They're definitely a pioneer in that space.
So, I mean, I played Doom, but I didn't remember what company was responsible for Doom.
Oh, I definitely didn't either. It's one of those things as a kid, you play the game, you love it, you enjoy it, but you pay no attention to who developed the game. As far as who developed it, published it, all that stuff, honestly, that's something I never really noticed until late middle school, high school. Back then, I was more concerned, is the game good? Yes. Good. Then I'll buy it, and I'll play it.
There was a certain kind of way I would know beforehand. Like, I would feel like certain games from certain companies would be good. In the same kind of way that people sort of judge, movies based off of, oh, is it coming out, is it a Disney movie? Oh, it's a Disney movie? Well, fantastic. It's fucking great. But it's not certainly the case, especially in high school. I started to notice EA a bunch. It was an earbug.
Oh yeah, EA Sports. It's in the game.
Yeah.
Actually, hold on. Just before we mention that point, you're right. There's a couple instances where I do remember the developer. One was Rare because it flashed before you were about to play GoldenEye. Another one was Perfect Dark in that sense, Banjo-Kazooie, because the same Rare logo would flash around in its gold logo. And then I remember for the Twisted Metal, another earbug that, because you're mentioning it, was 989 Studios, and it would make that same thing every single time you boot up the game on PS1. And that's one of those things where I had kind of forgotten about, but then when you said EA Sports, it just made me remember all of the other ones.
Oh, dude, yeah, Rare. I remember Rare. Oh, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark. My brother, I remember when we did. I think it was Dark Agent.
Dark Agent, Double O Agent.
I guess it was Perfect Dark's version of Double O Agent. We did a complete campaign co-op on Xbox Live.
There was Agent, I want to say Secret Agent or Special Agent, and then there was Perfect Agent.
Perfect.
I can't remember the difficulties levels for sure. It was Perfect. I want to say it was Perfect Agent. I have to definitely go look that back up. But yeah, we played that back when it was re-released on the Xbox Live Arcade in, I want to say 2010, and we beat the whole game, and it was a blast because I hadn't played that game since the N64 days, so at least 10 years.
Regret selling the 360 now. I had so many good games on that, but so Rare, like, what was it, IT that developed Doom?
Oh no, id.
id.
So ID.
Wow.
Yeah, id Software.
Super ego, but it left an impact on me in a certain way that didn't realize it would until much later on, especially with EA truly monopolized the way games were sold, packaged, distributed. It was an eye-opening experience. In the research that we've done about indie gaming, you said that, let's see, they started around the 60s?
Yeah, so it's not an official thing. It's one of those unofficial, from my notes here, it said, there's some debate as to whether the indie development started before the PCs with games developed for mainframe computers at universities and other large institutions. Because back then, the only institutions to have those large computers, like those big IBM server type computers, were universities and military use, but mostly universities for like educational purposes, for computational type stuff. But even still, there are people that would take their spare time to make games on these things just to see if they could do it, and sometimes make a thesis or just make a point about it. And it's at games such as 1963 Space War. We're not commercially financed and we're made by a small team, but lacked a commercial sector of the video game industry at the time to distinguish it from independent work. So it's one of those things where back then that wasn't considered a video game. Video game is like kind of a retroactive title that we put on things. It's one of those things where, oh yeah, and by the way, indie game developer, that's another retroactive term where put the stuff from way back in the day. The term started gaining prominence in the early 2000s, but before that, people that did make games like that, side project type stuff, they're considered, amateur, enthusiast, or hobbyist software.
So that's interesting. We were pretty much 10 or 11 when quote unquote indie games started to be identified or pointed out, sort of separated from the rest of the herd of the games. When we were 5, 6, 7, didn't matter if it was from an independent developer or a company as large and powerful as EA Sports get in the game.
And they did that perfectly. They knew that we would remember that. They knew the branding and all that would stick with us, even like as we're in our 30s.
It's actually kind of terrible. If you're a great marketer, you are a horrible psychologist. Essentially, what you do in marketing is you try and figure out what annoys people, what gets on their nerves, and then you exploit it. A person who understands, geez, you're gonna have to help me with this one. Iambic pentameter, was it?
Yeah, I think that's the term.
Yeah, it's the melody of the rhythm in a limerick or a song. The way that it's expressed, it can be catchy. It can be, it can loop around in your mind. And someone who understands psychology says, oh, well, we're going to try and avoid doing those things because it drives people insane. But if you're a marketer, you want people to be driven insane by your marketing tool because you want them to remember. Whoever came up with EA Sports get in the game, fuck you.
It's a bit like the commercials from when we were kids. The call J.G. Wentworth or
I need cash now. That's all. Like it's a stupid earbug, but man, is it true today. But
I know I haven't seen that commercial since the 90s, but still, that's the power of marketing.
So when I got into gaming, I mean, I was just going along the trend with what was popular. I mean, we didn't, like you said, didn't get the term indie games until earlier in the 2000s, 2001, 2002. In film, it's kind of been a little bit similar. But before we get into those, I was kind of curious. What did you dig up about research on independent games around that time here?
A little bit to unpack, but there's definitely a lot of good nuggets here. A lot of developers back in the 70s and the early 80s were and still started out as hobbyists. They would just kind of do this for fun on their, Commodores of the day or whatever home computers they had at the time, because that stuff would have cost a fortune. To get that kind of stuff, you definitely had to be a hobbyist or an enthusiast because that stuff was very expensive. Like we think today that specking and putting together a $1,200 PC is a lot of money. And to be fair, it is. But given inflation, given the cost of these components back then, I'm sure they would have been crying, happy tears if they had seen the cost of computers was today compared to what it was back then for people. Because I think back then, just to give context, the Odyssey, which was the console that you could play Pong on, I think back then it was over $500 in early 1972 money.
Whoa.
So, yeah. So I don't know what the inflation is on that because I don't have an inflation calculator on me, but I'm going to wager that's at least a couple grand. So imagine spending $2 to $3 grand on your PlayStation 5 or Xbox, whatever that's about to come out.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, considering the situation that's undeniably we're in today, I really hope, there's no one out there thinking, man, I'm going to go spend my stimulus check on an Xbox.
Oh,
Like,
I'm sure there are.
I mean, if it's made of gold, fantastic. You've got a great investment. But if it's just a standard old Xbox that's just going to be outdated next year.
Or just use as a Netflix playing device.
Yeah, right. That's the most expensive app I've ever bought.
Oh, yeah. There are people that essentially did that with their Xbox. It just became a Netflix and Hulu streamer. But I digress. As for the rest of the history goes, a lot of hobbyists in the 70s and 80s making games on those expensive computer systems or, PCs of the day. And then for most of the commercial sector, now this is the 80s, most of the commercial sector of the video game industry was focused on the growing home console market because back then you had the Atari systems in the early 80s that were coming out, the 26 and the 5200. You had the Commodore 64, which was more akin to a computer, but it was still a platform that developers released games on.
Yeah.
And then you had, of course, the Sega Master System and the original Nintendo. And given all of those systems, the growing home console market, and a number of games for personal computers of its day were released by one or two man teams, self distributed in stores or through mail order. So back then, the only way to get your games out, if you were those one or two man teams, was old school brick and mortar or catalog magazine. And that was the way it worked. And you relied on word of mouth and hope, a nice picture in a magazine and hope that that would be enough because back then, you didn't have IGN, you didn't have YouTube, you didn't have all these video game related, review places. Somebody had to buy your game, say it was good, and then you would hopefully that person would spread word of mouth and say to their friends and family, "This game is great. You should go buy this for yourself or for loved ones or your kids." That was the way it was done. That was how you got success as an indie game developer back in the 80s and late 70s, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to have proliferated.
Yeah, no, it was a great time. I mean, there was a lot of work involved for these one or two man teams because you probably had a 9 to 5 job and you'd have to do this during your spare time. And there was a lot of complex code to do it. I'd say developing a game today from scratch is way easier with all the tools and the open source software. Whereas back then, you kind of had to know your trick of the trade to do it. You had to be, a real computer guru, real coding master. So during the 90s, with the proliferation of consoles onto the market, making inroads as an indie developer began to get harder. By the N64 PS1 era, it became much harder for a one or two man team to succeed, and I managed to boil it down to these three reasons. One, the industry had started to coalesce around publishers that could pay large developers to make games and handle all of the marketing, promotions, publication costs, and opportunities to franchise game series. Two, those same publishers tended to be risk averse due to the high cost of production and would reject all same size or concepts that were too out there of small game developers. And then finally, number three, the market also became fractured due to the rise of the video game console, which required very expensive and hard to get development kits, typically reserved for those large developers and publishers. And so as a result, at least on the console market, and definitely here in the US, indie game development definitely took a large backseat. There were still teams out there that managed to kind of push their way through it and become something big of themselves. id Software Doom is a good example of that. All the guys in that company definitely had industry experience leading into Doom. Because they made Wolfenstein before that, and they had a few other They had a few other small projects in the 80s, but they're definitely one of the exceptions to the norm in terms of getting that success.
That's actually really interesting.
Now, in fairness, their games did release on PC. Not PC. Back in the day, it was on. I think it was DOS back then is what it released on, and then whatever platforms were out there at the time. But given that, they were definitely one of those guys that were a small operation as far as the number of players, but then they made their presence known and then became a big icon in the industry, making subsequent titles like, Doom 2, Quake, and then today they still make games today. I mean, they've released 2 more Doom games as of the 2016, and the newest one, Doom Eternal, I think just came out earlier this year, so they're definitely a success, and their success is still with us.
I love hearing about the stories like that, one or two man teams, mom and pop shops kind of thing. It's interesting how the development of technology pushed and challenged the passions within the hobbyists and developers who wanted to create those kind of games. In filmmaking, so filmmaking has sort of a subgenre of independent film as well. There are a bunch of well-known filmmakers who consider themselves independent or outside the studio system, which is a whole topic upon itself, but essentially boiling it down, there was a split in the film industry after, I want to say, the 1950s, when America had its un-American House Committee blacklists of writers, directors, producers, anyone who was considered red or a communist inside the film society was blacklisted. They weren't allowed to work on major productions, but that's how.
I remember seeing a movie about that recently, Trumbo.
Yeah, yeah. I recently watched Inside the Actor Studio, Actors on Actors, and I had what was his name? I think it was Bryan Cranston who was doing Trumbo, and I was like, I love Bryan Cranston, and then I went into a Breaking Bad hole on YouTube, but
He's a damn good actor. Like I know I'm not contributing much by saying that, but he's a damn good actor, and I love his work.
I appreciated that he was given a cameo in Godzilla, but I also was upset that he was killed. But
I was upset he only was in that movie for maybe 15, 20 minutes because
he
that's
sold
kind
it,
of the
though.
reason I wanted to go see that movie. Oh, he's in it. He's
Yeah.
got a big role. Yes, and then he died. Whatever time,
He sold
15,
it,
20
though.
minutes in. He did. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, my wife. Oh, that scene. Anyway, moving on. Yeah. Trumbo. Blacklists. There were writers, producers, directors who needed to make money, so they needed to figure out a way to produce films on their own to keep their livelihood. Essentially, well, part of it was they wanted to keep their livelihood. The other part of it was that these were artists who needed to express their art. They needed to express their art, and the means by which they were expressing their art was taken away from them. So they banded together. They sold scripts to writers who weren't blacklisted. They banded their resources together, and a bunch of them started independent, quote unquote, independent film companies. A lot of them were, I believe, TriStar, Columbia. I know the newer ones that popped up in the 70s and 80s were New Line, Regency. Oh, I'm forgetting the third one. Lionsgate. That's it. There's a bunch of others. Independent companies. Yeah, a lot of filmmakers consider themselves independent or outside of the studio system. The studio system is the system that maintained the regulations of blacklisting. So anyone who was a part of the system was a part of the problem. And anyone who works in film today either identifies as an independent filmmaker or part of the studio system, falling in line with the rules and regulations. The Coen brothers, for example, are widely regarded as some of the greatest filmmakers in our time at the moment. They haven't made too many bad films, and most of the films that they have made have been highly acclaimed.
For me, the Coen brothers tend to be, I feel like, hit or miss. Like there are films they make where it's just like that's a great movie, no doubt, and then there are others where it's not that I hated it. Like let's be clear, for all the Coen brothers movies I've seen, I've not hated any one of them, but there are some where it's just like, it didn't do it for me.
Sure. And every filmmaker and every film, has their taste, and people pick and choose what they like. But when it comes to quality, when it comes to detail, when it comes to creativity, a lot of people would look towards the Coen brothers and say they're master filmmakers. The same way that you would look at Stanley Kubrick and say he is a legend. He is. But in today's society, I believe that there are a couple of directors: Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg.
Nolan.
Oh my God, yeah, Nolan. They're top tier class, but Nolan considers himself an independent filmmaker. The Coen brothers consider themselves independent filmmakers. Martin Scorsese has tread the line. He's had films distributed through major studios, but he's also maintained in his origins, in his very first film, Raging Bull, he was very much against the studios. As much as he wanted to be in the system, his filmmaking was not something that they wanted to sell. It was very violent, it was very dark. Something that we have grown used to today because people enjoy Martin Scorsese pictures. But imagine if you didn't have that opportunity. But anyway, there are a bunch of different avenues for films to be distributed. and it was essentially just going to a theater, holding an event, essentially opening a Hollywood premiere. But since television came around, and computers, and streaming services, the technology that pushed independent filmmakers out inevitably became the tools that they used to get back in and sort of change things up. Like you were saying about indie quote unquote gamers. As soon as they wanted to go to Nintendo, as soon as they wanted to go to Sony PlayStation, they were met with a wall, as you were saying, about the high cost of production for them. Same thing with independent filmmakers.
Oh yeah, like because not just the production, but and the same thing with the movie industry is that you have the advertising, you have all the
Right.
other
Expenses.
yeah, you had the marketing, promotions, the publication cost in the case of the gaming. So there, and then that's the thing. There's just so many costs associated with it. So a lot of any developers just kind of had to pack it up, or pack it up on console and just kind of focus on the PC market. And I know I didn't say it earlier, but I definitely want to clear that up. It was Doom's success came from the PC market because I think it probably was shoved off the console market. Now, I don't know that for certain, but I'm going to say their decision to go PC was probably an easy one for them because they didn't have to pay for expensive development kits. For them, they could just kind of all put together on a open platform. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right on the cost and being prohibitive, and it just made developers, and in this case, indie directors, kind of push them out, and they had to kind of deal with it for a while, right?
Essentially, yeah. They needed to find a way to either survive or make their outside work seem appropriate. So they essentially had to build their own studios within themselves. A lot of them did succeed because there's always a market. You either create it or you find it, but there's always there's always a person out there who's going to watch a horror movie. There's always a person out there who's going to watch a science fiction movie. And there's always a person out there who's going to want to read or write or play. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. There's a market for everything. There's a
Right.
niche for everything.
So, in that respect, independent film flourished because a lot of people were getting tired of the same old song and dance. If anyone is familiar with the Disney movie, you can immediately recognize a Disney movie because of the Disney movie tropes. There's something that's always in a Disney movie. There's always an overly optimistic or naive character who rallies the troops and come on, gang, it's not that difficult. There's always some sort of chipper, comical, light-hearted sense about a Disney movie. And everyone's getting sick of that. So when Martin Scorsese came out with Raging Bull and we saw Robert De Niro break somebody's eye on film, everyone went, "Holy shit! This is different. This is raw. This is raw. This is real. This is different." Immediately became what people wanted.
It broke the mold. It broke the mold in a way that a lot of games, broke the mold in their industry and changed things.
Right.
And it's not even necessarily like an application of indie gaming, just in general. There's always a movie, there's always a game, there's always some media that kind of changes the way we think about it. Like, we did this before, but we can also do it this way now.
Yeah. With the rise of the indie game, quote unquote, subgenre and people learning about all these different games, I personally remember jumping onto the Broforce hype when that came out for, Jesus, I think it was PlayStation?
I think it came out for everything. I think, because I remember, because it's on Steam, it's on PlayStation, it's on Xbox, and it's probably on Switch too.
If it's not, it should be.
Yeah. Like, I love that game because, side tangent, I just love that game because it took all of the awesome tropes from 80s action movies and put it in a game as playable characters. And
That's right.
yes, 1,000 times yes.
Yes, I definitely want the Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Predator Arnold Schwarzenegger fighting the Terminator Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Great indie game. One of the many.
But yeah, because of the advancing in technology, a game like that could still be considered indie, but it also rivaled games, AAA games, EA Sports is in the game. Things like that. The same way that we're kind of going through the same thing with film at the moment, where television has become the new film-esque quality in motion pictures. If you've noticed, a lot of television has been much more cinematic, as in like a film, like a movie. And the opposite is happening inside theaters. A lot of theaters are becoming the blockbuster garbage movie makes $1 million. You go to the movies because of the trash and the stuff that Now I'm not knocking all movies that are in theaters nowadays, but you have to admit, I mean, there are a lot of superhero movies and a lot of holiday movies, a lot of kid movies in theaters, and
Oh
those.
yeah, they're your comedies that only have maybe a few laughs. Your summer destruction movies like San Andreas or Rampage. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
You know what I'm talking about. The movies that the studios say, hey, this is a safe bet. We're not going to lose money. A lot of independent filmmakers thought that they wanted their movie premiered in a theater, but nowadays, I mean, if you're a filmmaker and you have a series published on Hulu or Amazon or one of the newer streaming services like Q,
Are you talking about Quibi?
Quibi,
Oh yeah, they went bankrupt.
damn it, they had a really good show on there that I was hoping. Ah,
That's
anyway.
the thing. Everybody said the same thing. There was that one show, but yeah, it went bankrupt because it just didn't catch on. But yeah, anyway.
But essentially, you have more opportunities now that technology has progressed. And I think that indie games sort of kind of parallel. They never really went away, but indie games have challenged the system in a way that the system either needed to evolve and eradicate them or evolve and accept them. And in the same way that Broforce was accepted and is an independent game in the sense that it was created by independent developers, but distributed through a wide array of options, it's encouraging in that sense that it doesn't sound like this is going to go away anytime soon.
And that's the beautiful thing is there are so many games now that are released without a major publisher or even any publisher at all, and it's just the developers themselves doing all the work. And honestly, that aspect I feel like I could contribute to. I'd say the mid 2000s is where that finally took off, and indie gaming forever changed in a good way. The developers were now publishing their own work and making what they want.
Let me tell you why that's really interesting. Because in the year 2001, the film Requiem for a Dream was the first independent movie to receive an Oscar nomination. It was a huge buzz because it didn't go through any channels that mainstream media recognized. And I suppose for good reason, because it's a very difficult movie to watch.
One of my friends once described it as it's a great movie if you don't want to sleep for the night.
Exactly. Yes, it's a very jarring film, but Darren Aronofsky and Jennifer Tilly. I think it's Jennifer Tilly. No, Jennifer Connelly. Wonderful actress. She an Oscar-worthy performance, but a lot of people did not believe that those things could exist outside the studio. But around the same time that independent gaming as you mentioned, around that same time is when independent films were also starting to become more recognized. And
Oh yeah, that's the thing. So in the mid 2000s, you had the beginning of I think it was the sixth, the seventh console generation, the PS3, Xbox 360, and the Nintendo Wii era, and there were occasional indie developers, making it onto the console market, but it was few and far between just because of the prohibitive costs. But somewhere along that line, two big things happened. Xbox Live Arcade was released onto Xbox, and with that, there were a lot of small developers that, for the first time in either forever or ever, actually, were able to release their independent games, on that platform and be sold to a wide distribution audience on the 360. For me, I remember two big games that became huge blockbuster sellers that everybody knew and everybody wanted to play and everybody was talking about. They were Super Meat Boy and Shovel Knight. And I think those games really kicked it off. And I might be misremembering my times, but I just remember Xbox Arcade taking off sometime around the mid 2000s. Maybe it was later 2000s. And the Steam store becoming a thing. And in that time, the Steam store, I think, only sold like Valve games, but then they opened up to third-party games developers. And the point was, when those two marketplaces opened up, all of a sudden you had floods of indie developers making games, publishing on both those marketplaces, and as a result, there were so many brand new indie games that we were never have ever been exposed to, had everything kind of just stayed the same. Like I said, you had Super Meat Boy, you had Shovel Knight, you had Fez, you had Minecraft. I just want to say, like, that's Minecraft's a game that, again, the development started on PC, it had an unofficial release on PC, but it did release on consoles, and it became the single best-selling game of all time because a guy was able to develop it and distribute it on. Again, admittedly, he distributed on PC first, but its huge success is because it also was able to tap that console market, which people had millions and millions of consoles in their homes. People had PCs, but a lot of people had consoles, and so they were able to tap into that success. That all being said, the key to sustained success in the long run in the indie gaming industry was online distribution over the internet, allowing these game developers to sell directly to players. And this new interest was kicked off by the things in the mid 2000s. I should have mentioned this before, by a lot of open source software, a lot of game engines being available for cheap or free. With all of these things happening, you had a whole wide world of indie gaming born. And today, I look at my Steam list today and I have some AAA games there, admittedly, but I have so many more indie games because, not because AAA games can't be fun. It's like you said with the movie industry. There are some good blockbuster movies out there that do get awards and that are great to watch.
Sure.
But there are a lot of really great movies that just don't get the recognition and that are made by a smaller team, just like indie gaming.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, looking through my library, too. I mean, I think most of my Steam games are also... it's funny that you also mentioned that Steam kind of took up around that time, too, because I also remember Steam exclusively doing Valve games. So I was constantly told about updates about Portal and Team Fortress 2.
Half-Life, definitely Half-Life, another big one.
Oh, yeah, I completely forgot about Half-Life, but you're right. Yeah, that was a huge Valve game.
Oh, totally. I mean, I'm looking at my games now, and I mean, I have stuff like, Truck Simulator, which was made which would not have been made by any AAA developer. I've got Among Us, that new popular game that all of you have now heard of. Like, there's Cuphead, Day of Infamy, City Skylines, which the only reason that game was made was because the latest SimCity released in 2013 was just bad, didn't deliver anything that people wanted from the older SimCities, and it was just heavily, what's the word, microtransaction, I think, to hack and back. And so as a result, the developers for City Skylines said, you know what, we're going to make our own city simulator and it's going to be better. And guess what? At first, it might have been a slightly rough around the edges, but with constant updates and DLCs, it is probably the city simulator game to play now. And it's all because of indie developers being able to have the platform to do so.
I also had City Skylines. Yeah, I got a bunch of games. I've got House Party, Happy Room, 7 Days to Die. One of the games I really like talking about, it's a really indie game. It's called Feather, and all you do is fly around as a bird. You can swap birds, you have to find puzzles, but the game doesn't explain any of this to you. You have to fly around, explore, discover on your own without any sort of input at all. I like games like that, and considering the fact that I don't think a lot of people would have found this game very interesting on a console, I'm really glad that they had a platform like Steam to be able to upload this game, because I love birds. And I'm glad that there's a game that I can listen to this Zen music, don't have to worry about being killed around the corner, I don't have to worry about zombies breaking down the door. I can just fly to the top of a mountain, land on a tree, and say, hey, I want to plunge headfirst into that lake, and do it.
To me, games where it doesn't tell you what to do, you just go at it and have a good time. Those to me are some of the best games to play. And one that I kind of want to mention, definitely, and give a shout out to is Journey. It released originally on PS3. You can play it on PS4 now. Who knows? They could even do a re-release on PS5. It's a game where you're this, nameless character, and your goal is to get to this top of the mountain. And an online game, you can play with other players in the world, but you don't invite anybody. As you're marching toward the objective, you see other players, and the only way you can communicate with them is this kind of symbol talk that you don't understand what it means, but every button on your controller, the X, square, triangle, and circle, they correspond to different symbols. I don't know what they mean, but I know that you can use them to communicate with other players. And as I was traveling, I was communicating with this one player, and he and I were together the entire time. Like, we had a bond. We couldn't understand what we were saying. There was no voice chat, nothing like that. But we were traveling with each other the whole time, and we, got separated in the snowstorm part at the end of the game. And as we were ascending to the final section, I was looking around like, where is he? Where is he? Like, I made a bond with this guy. Like, where is this guy? And I ended up finding him like right before the door at the very end. And it was just a very, very awesome experience. Awesome game. If you guys have an opportunity to go play Journey on the PS3 or PS4, absolutely go play it. I think it's $20. It might be 10 now. But if it's ever on sale or you're even just slightly interested in what I just said, go look up a review, go play it. It's a great game.
And on that note, if you guys have any games that you feel like deserve some indie game appreciation love, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and leave a comment down below to let us know. And we'll potentially talk about it in an updated version.
Definitely. Love to hear what you guys have to say. Love to hear any game suggestions or topics, or even just games that you guys play and you want us to talk about. Let us know.
Absolutely. Start a conversation in that comment section without us, and we'll join in when we have the chance. Well, guys, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the PinPoint Players. Hope you guys tune in next time when we discuss underappreciated games, games that deserve sequels and unfinished games, and things of that nature and whatnot.
Thank you guys for tuning in.
Take care.